Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Field, and it gives me great pleasure to be hosting today's webinar on behalf of Auto Resource, brought to you by Automechanika. So on behalf of us all, a very warm welcome. This session is the third session in the series of webinars to be delivered by the team for the UK's automotive aftermarket since June. And today's discussion will address the findings of an extensive report commissioned by Messe Frankfurt UK titled The State of the Aftermarket. The report, which surveyed over 12,000 automotive aftermarket professionals and draws on the insights and opinion of industry experts, explores the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact the COVID pandemic has had on our sector. It also addresses the ongoing challenges and opportunities that we face from technology, skills development, Brexit, and the evolving environment that we do business in. The full findings of the report will be available in the next week, and today we have a very qualified panel to discuss these points. Before I introduce our guests, I need to cover some brief housekeeping. Today's webinar will be recorded. If you have technical difficulties seeing the screen or accessing the audio, please be advised that the best browsers to use are Google Chrome or Firefox. There is technical support online at support.goto.com/webinar. We will take 45 minutes for discussions. We'll have some polls in between the various slides, and we will have a live questions and answers at the end. Please use the chat function throughout to ask your questions, and we'll come back to them at the very end of the webinar. And if we don't answer your questions today, we will also come back to you following the webinar. Today, we are joined by Wendy Williamson, Chief Executive of the IAAF, Quentin Le Hetet, General Manager of GiPA UK, Steve Nash, CEO of the IMI, and Frank Harvey, Head of Member Services at the IGA. Each of our panel will share their experiences from their positions in the industry and with the knowledge of the many companies and federations that they represent. So if we're all ready, let's begin. We're going to kick off the webinar with, first of all, a poll. And what we'll do is we'll take one topic at a time, and we'll move on to the coronavirus and lockdown topic. And what you can see from the slide currently is just an overview of how the State of the Aftermarket report was commissioned and the efforts that Messe Frankfurt went to in putting this together. And as we said before, it will be available on autoresource.co.uk over the coming weeks. Okay, so if you're ready to begin, we're going to start with the first poll. So to what extent has the pandemic and lockdown changed your business planning for 2021? Thank you very much. Okay, so to begin with on the coronavirus and lockdown, the survey found that 53% of businesses believe that it will take 18 months to 2 years for them to recover to pre-COVID levels. Quentin, if I can come to you first, where we talk about the MOT test, did the Beat the Rush campaign work? Did we find it successful? And if I can bring you forward to today and possibly into the future as well, where are we now? And are we currently oversubscribed?
So yeah, the Beat the Rush campaign was introduced after the MOT exemption was revoked at the beginning of August, and the idea really was that the exemption has created an important backlog, to say the least, of MOT tests that needs to be carried out in the coming months. And what we can see from the figures that are shared on a regular basis with the DVSA, you can see on the slides here, we actually can see that in orange there was the basically yellow the first forecast, and then you have the darker shade of kind of yellow brown. You can see the different subsequent consecutive forecasts. What you can see is that if you take a month like November, last year at the same time we had about 2.7 million of MOT tests carried out, and this year for the first forecast that was released in August, the plan was almost plus 1.1 million of MOT tests to be done within the same month. So you can imagine the importance of trying to kind of smooth out, if we can say that, the volume of MOT to be carried out during those months, because it is just a massive strain for the industry and not an easy one to get by. So what we can see, however, is that Beat the Rush campaign is working, because if you look at the subsequent forecast, we can see that they're always decreasing, meaning that people are actually taking the lead in order to get their MOT test done in advance as per what they are supposed to do if they were doing it at the last time. So it's definitely good news. However, it's still massive numbers. You can see for December, for December we are at 2.7 millions on their last November forecast, and one was published last week with 2.2 millions left for the month. So it's still quite an important number, okay? And January at the moment is planned to 3.3 millions, okay? So the end of the year doesn't mean this is the end of that topic, of that issue, and there is actually still a much longer term or mid-term impact on the industry, okay? And obviously the impact will also be, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was going to say, and Frank, with that peak, or those peak months that we've seen,
yeah,
there is obviously a lull projected for April, May, possibly June next year.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the advice that we can?
I think, you know, garages are very concerned about that period of time. I think what we hope to see is that there'll be some support from government for garages during that time. I think, you know, the sort of MOT extension, whilst garages were asked to remain open and did so by and large initially, and then the MOT extension was brought in. So I think come next year, I think it's going to be a worrying time through April, May, June for garages. We're also, you know, we're hearing now that whilst the MOT side of things are busy, the actual repair maintenance side is quite quiet. So, you know, hopefully that will pick up as people sort of get their cars back out on the road. One thing that we don't know yet for April, May and June is how many people are going to want to preserve their MOT anniversary. You know, speaking to even a few family and friends, they're saying that they sort of put everything together in terms of insurance, MOT, servicing, and we may get a number of people that say, you know, I'm actually going to preserve those dates. So it may not be as bad as what we think, but it's still very much an unknown.
And that's, Steve, that's very interesting what Frank has said there in terms of government support, but also it being very much an unknown. How do we, as an industry, how do we as garages actually be proactive about this? How do we spend that time as wisely as possible?
Well, look, I mean, seasonality is something that we deal with all the time in the industry. I mean, this is extreme, of course. This is on another level. But I don't think you can wait and leave things to chance. I mean, I wouldn't bank on government support because it may not be forthcoming. I would say that, you know, I mean, we've talked about people who may want to sort of preserve their anniversary date. Well, you know, how about prompting them to do that? You know, I mean, one of the things Frank touched on there is that actually the mileage that most people will have covered in that year leading up to next kind of April will in most cases be extremely low. So why not be marketing to them to say, look, if you're going to get, you know, I mean, come next spring, we'll have vaccines. I mean, Boris is saying he's going to abandon the tier system in late February. So, you know, people are going to start looking at doing some substantial journeys again. You know, that's an opportunity to market to them, you know, and say, look, you know, let's get your car in, let's check it over thoroughly. If it was due an MOT originally at this time, we can do that too. You know, I mean, it's always the thing, isn't it, in our business, that you've got to be on it, because you can't just wait to see what happens. You absolutely can't, because the worst might happen, and then you've got no work. So I think I'm not saying it's easy. It never has been, but I think you've got to be proactive and get out there and start making some offers to people to try and drum up that business ahead of when it actually happens.
No,
and
I
use
think you're
some
right.
of that time for training as well, by the way. You'd expect me to say that.
I think you're right, and we've got to look at it as an industry positively. And from your side, Wendy, this does mean that the vehicle park is getting older, which is good for the independent sector, but perhaps not for franchise dealers. And do we expect that we will see more effort on the part of the vehicle manufacturer to retain customers after 3 years?
Absolutely, and you know, agree. On the face of it, it's very positive for the independent sector. They remained open throughout the, you know, right from day one. Garages remained open, whereas the vast majority of franchise sector closed down. So I think independents have won a lot of new customers, which is fantastic news. But I think this potentially makes the franchise dealers, you know, more proactive with what they're going to do to either win back customers that they've lost, or indeed go after their customers for servicing for longer periods of time. So I expect we'll see some throwback in terms of offering some hot deals on servicing, service packs. Potentially we could see renewed vigor in some of the parts programs from vehicle manufacturers. I mean, Ford have been quite vocal recently in terms of going out and expanding their program. So I think they will be more proactive. And I also think that we can't walk away from the threat that we're seeing in new technology. And I think garages need to embrace this, not to walk away from it, because the franchise dealers will be saying, come to us because of the you know, because of the technology and the equipment that you need to repair today's vehicles. So great news overall, but we can't rest on our laurels.
Thank you for that response, and also those very valuable insights. And it leads us nicely actually onto the conversation about technology. And we're going to start again with a poll, but I just want to bring your attention to the following slide. Obviously, the survey found a number of technologies impacting the industry as we speak, and we know. And my first question to Steve is going to be on the petrol and diesel van, but we're going to kick off first with a poll. So the poll for our technology segment is: do you think the ban on the sale of wholly owned petrol and diesel vehicles is achievable by 2030? Yes, no, or unsure? Okay, just a few more results to come in. Okay, and fantastic. We'll close that poll now. Steve, if I can come to you first, do you think the actually 52% of respondents answered no to the question of did they think it was achievable for the ban on petrol and diesel vehicles in 2030? Can I ask you the same question?
Look, let's just forget for a moment what the UK government have mandated. Let's look at what's happening outside of that. next year, the so-called CAFE regulations, which are the emission regulations across the whole of Europe and will still be applying here in the UK, mean that next year, so that comes in 3 tranches, 21, 25 and 30, incredibly strict. I mean, it means that unless any manufacturer, if they don't have a substantial number of 0 or ultra low emission vehicles in their fleet, they're not going to hit those numbers, and the fines are monumental. That's why you've seen, you know, the tie-up between Fiat and Peugeot. I mean, Fiat were one of the big manufacturers who were nowhere with their electric technology. So, you know, they've had to kind of make that alliance or come together in order to be able to borrow some of that technology from Peugeot. You're seeing alliances you never thought you would see between brands that are rivals. Probably only Volkswagen as a group is completely on top of it, and a few others, but the truth is, so outside of what the government have mandated, that pressure is on the manufacturers anyway. So unless they were kind of substantially at 0 emissions by 2030 anyway, they'd be receiving these monumental fines. So is it difficult? My God, yes, it is. I mean, it's, you know, it's not even 2 model cycles, is it? I mean, a model cycle is normally about 7 years. You know, it's not even 2 model cycles from now until 2030. So yes, it's incredibly difficult. And in some ways, it's, I was going to say, in some ways, it's more difficult for the existing car manufacturers than it is for the new entrants, because the existing car manufacturers have got to keep the old sausage machine working while they're building the new one. You know, whereas the new entrants come straight in with their new products. But you know, one way or another, they're going to have to make it. And I think it'll have a big effect on the assortment available, the variety of cars available. I mean, you look at the breadth of ranges some manufacturers have today, I don't think they'll be able to achieve that kind of breadth of choice, certainly not within 10 years, you know, but at least they gave a stay of execution of another 5 years on hybrids, which it helps a bit. But yeah, it's monumentally difficult, but they've got no choice, have they? And I don't think the UK will be the last market to mandate 2030 either.
And interesting, as you say, from the outset, it's not necessarily, forget all the headlines from the UK government, there are external pressures already on the vehicle manufacturers.
Yeah.
With legislation.
Yeah, so yeah, they've kind of got to be there anyway.
And Frank, do you think we have a gulf in the market currently between those who have invested in working on electric vehicles and those that haven't?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, you look at the graphic on screen, and we've seen 150% and more sort of growth in sort of alternative fuel vehicles this year from last year. And I think there's always going to be a bit of a time lag, particularly in the aftermarket. But what we're seeing is a lot more interest, a lot more inquiries. In terms of sort of EV, we're seeing members specialise in EV now, and they're the sort of 3-year plus sort of vehicles that I lovingly say are coming out of captivity. So they're coming away from the franchise network, and they're getting into the independent aftermarket, and we're very much seeing a lot more inquiries. And Steve, I'm sure you're doing the same in terms of the EV qualifications. That the independent sector is seeing that very much as an opportunity because of their customer base. I think, you know, you look at many independents and they've been dealing their customers for generations, you know, multiple generations through families, and I think they've very much got one eye on the future. But there will always be a time lag between the introduction of technology and then that sort of finding its way into the aftermarket and the training element.
And Wendy, if I can ask you, because obviously there's a lot of commentary around independent garages when we talk about the petrol and diesel vehicle ban, but when that impacts the whole industry, the entire industry, suppliers and also motor factors, what does a motor factor in 2030, 2035 look like, and what parts are on the shelf?
I'm going to say probably take that one to Wendy.
I think it's worth making the point, Mark, that even in 2030, there's still going to be an awful lot of ICEs on the road. So it's not as if the roads are going to be devoid of anything. And motor factors are well used to change. I mean, if you look at the changing technology in vehicles over the years, from the move from brake drums to discs, as an example, you know, they will simply cope with the changing demands that will come through from Frank's members gearing up to service and maintain electric vehicles. And there is still hydrogen somewhere on the horizon, but then they're always on the horizon. And I think from a stocking point of view, parts on electric vehicles wear out less, and there are fewer components, so it will impact in that way. But actually, I think the bigger change or the bigger threat from a technological viewpoint, from a motor factor perspective, is actually having access to the right data in order to be able to interpret what garages want. And I think other market trends, I mean, the lockdown has increased the online platforms by something like 40%. It's kind of moved that whole process through 5 years, as we're seeing more and more people go to online stuff. So, you know, companies like Who Can Fix My Car have shot up massively during this period. So I think we all need to be kind of conscious of some of these other these market changes affecting motor factors, and also a knock-on effect throughout the value chain.
You make a good point, because there's so much affecting the marketplace, not just in the external pressures or the legislation with regards to electric vehicles. And Quentin, you mentioned recently, Thursday in fact, that there is a real need for the independent aftermarket to develop an electrified offer to motorists. Are we as far along as we should be?
For sure, but first of all, I think to paraphrase what Wendy just said, which I think is key and sometimes is not very well understood by commentators which are outside the industry, is the fact that by 2030, new car sales, IC engine car sales, are going to be banned. It doesn't mean that between the 31st of December 2029 and the 1st of January 2030, all cars will become hybrid and electric vehicles, and potentially hydrogen as well, depending on the development. So I think this is very important to have this in mind. The transition is more smooth, if we can say that, for the aftermarket than it is for the dealership. I think it's important to have this in mind. There will still be a lot of cars at this stage that are ICE vehicles, and that needs to be maintained. So that's the first point to have in mind, which is sometimes a misconception for some commentator. So it's not going to be a huge breakthrough. It is going to be progressive.
Okay.
In terms of the consumption of parts and so on, we did quite recently an analysis of the Norwegian market, which is quite an interesting one, because this is the only market really at the moment almost in the world where you can find enough sample of drivers, if we can say that, with plug-in hybrid vehicles, battery electric vehicles, and compare them with ICE vehicles. It's very interesting to see that actually the aftermarket is not dead once ICE vehicles are out of the equation, if we can say that. So there is still quite a lot to take out from there. The part consumption is going to be different, the operations are going to be different, but there is still money to be made in a different way. It's sure that it's going to challenge the business model of workshops as they are today. However, this is going to be a smooth transition, so it's fine. I think the other point which is key is that yes, and that's really the challenge for the industry, there is definitely a need for an alternative, for a fair competition alternative, if we can say that. And the independent aftermarket response and readiness for such vehicles is at the moment still to be built on and people that are already trained don't necessarily see that many cars unless they are specialized at the moment. So I think this is very important to have in mind that the need for training is very important, and there is also a how can I say that, a long-term convincing process that needs to be done with the independent aftermarket. Some people, for example, we still, when we survey independent garage, we still see a lot of independent garage which are potentially a bit old school and that are saying, no, I'm never going to get training for that because I don't see the point. I'll be dead before I actually see those cars in. And I think this is a very important point. We need to start now talking about this because a lot of people are reluctant to it, but actually it's coming sooner that people think. And that's what we can see on that chart, with 26% of registration as of end of October 2020 being either hybrid or electric vehicles.
Thank you, Quentin. I can't remember a time throughout my 20 plus years in the industry where there has been so much going on affecting our trade and affecting the businesses. I'm sure a lot of other sectors can say that. And you mentioned there about the need to be, or to cope with these challenges, to cope with these changes, you're going to need to train, you're going to need to upskill. And I'm going to move on to skills now, if that's okay. Again, I'm going to make you work. I'm going to start with another poll. Do remember, you can ask questions throughout this webinar in the questions box. But we're going to now move on to skills, look at apprentices. And just before we launch the poll, the State of the Aftermarket report found that only a quarter of businesses feel the UK aftermarket is equipped with the skills and training to keep up with some of the technological developments that we've just discussed over the last few moments. So when you're ready, we're going to start the poll. And the poll is that, do you expect your investment in training in 2021 to increase, decrease, or stay the same? We will publish all the results of these polls as well via Auto Resource following the webinar. We're still collecting responses. Thank you very much for taking part in these polls. A couple more moments. Okay, and now we'll finish the poll. And Steve, if I can start with yourself, more than 60% of respondents said that they were going to increase their investment in training and skills in 2021. Looking at apprentices, which are down in almost every sector, but the automotive aftermarket or automotive industry being one of the largest areas of decline, can you just explain where we're going wrong as a sector and what we can do to reverse that decline?
It's not so much a case of going wrong, because you can understand the driver behind this. Look, I mean, to put some numbers behind that, this year across all apprenticeships, there was a drop of about 60% in apprentice recruitment. In automotive, it was 87%. And I can tell you that, I mean, not much more than maybe 10 days before the original lockdown, my team had a meeting with some of the biggest employers in the industry. And you could summarize the HR directors of those employers, and you could summarize those discussions as being about attraction and retention. How do we find people? How do we keep them? That's been an ongoing issue almost since we came out of the crash. And we've suffered all through that period. That was 2008. All through that period, we've been playing catch up for the years when we didn't recruit apprentices as an industry. So there's always been a shortage. And I mean, the independents watching this will know they've had their people poached by the franchise dealers. I mean, you know, let's not forget that we've also managed to supplement our workforce with a lot of people from different parts of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe. That's going to become more difficult come next year because of what's going on with Brexit. So, you know, I understand. The first thing you've got to do, obviously, is survive. And it's very difficult to be taking people on, apprentices or anybody, when you're potentially laying people off. And a lot of people did lay staff off. So I'm not saying I don't understand, but I do recognise, though, that that the situation we're in at the moment is buying a problem going forward, because the underlying issues that existed in March last year, in early March last year, have not gone away. We don't have too many people in the industry. We have quite the opposite, you know, skilled people. So, you know, it is going to be important to try and get back onto recruiting and training people as soon as it's practical to do so. But I mean, with the existing workforce, I mean, picking up on some of the things you said earlier on, you know, we are in the biggest we're seeing the biggest technological changes we've seen for 100 years. You've got to go right back to the post-First World War period, when modern cars as we know them started to come into existence, to have a comparable period. And right now, of the 235,000 or so technicians in the industry, only 5% of them are actually qualified to work on high voltage electrics. And don't forget, that's governed by the Electricity at Work Act and the Health and Safety Executive. So anybody who has a go at it and gets themselves hurt, you know, that's a prosecution waiting to happen. So you do, you know, and it's common sense anyway, isn't it? You don't mess around with high voltage, you know, potentially lethal high voltages without knowing what you're doing. So, you know, there's a big gap at the moment, and of course we were making reasonable progress on that up to the pandemic, but it's kind of dropped right back since last March. So yeah, there's a big job to be done. There's a big job to be done, because clearly the number of electrified vehicles that are going to hit the market I mean, it was estimated before the pandemic that by 2025, 50% of all the new cars sold would be electrified. I'm sure Quentin's the man to comment on that, but I'm sure that will have come forward. It's probably more likely to be 2024 or maybe even earlier now, but you know, this is coming at us at a pace. And I agree with everybody else. You know, we need a broad competitive market. We don't just need, you know, the franchise dealers to corner all of that business. You know, we need, you know, consumers need choice. So, you know, yeah. Well, I've probably said enough, because the others will need to say something as well. But you know me, I could talk forever.
That's not a problem, and thank you for that valuable insight. I think it does lead me on to asking Frank, from your own perspective, with EVs in mind, is there more of a job for us to do as an industry to really understand how to get to grips with what it takes to be trained on high voltage vehicles?
I think that there's a number of issues, and Steve touched on it at the beginning of his piece there, in that, you know, we've got to attract the right people into the sector. I mean, you know, the diminishing sort of skills force and the aging workforce in our industry has been a problem for decades in reality. And I think, you know, one of the things that we need to do as an industry is attract the right people. You know, if you think about a modern motor vehicle now, and we've talked about technology, not just EV and the new drivetrains and ADAS and everything else that's out there, and like Steve said, it's coming at us like a steam train. I think, you know, the biggest issue that we've got is, as an industry and an aftermarket, to survive, we need to sort of work on the perception of the industry, because it's not as it's portrayed on TV these days. I mean, you look at sort of many of the things that go on in soap operas, and sort of, no disrespect to them, but the garage is always a single bay operation, sort of stuck in a corner somewhere. And you know, you look at the modern independent, and they've got tens of thousands of pounds invested in equipment for diagnosis and everything else. And I think the sector is moving along, but in terms of bringing the right entrants in and training people to the right level is always going to be a challenge. But that new lifeblood that we need to bring in is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, it's going to wither and die on the vine.
You make a good point, because I guess what you're saying there then is that we have the skills issue, we have the training that we need to do, but also, and Wendy, if I can bring you in here, there is a communication battle to be won on behalf of the independent sector.
Yes, very much so. And I just before I comment, I mean, I think it's fair to say that we are not alone as a sector with struggling to recruit apprentices. I think that is common across many of the industries. And how is it that going back a couple of years ago, when some of the larger vehicle manufacturers, they were putting out apprentice programs, they were oversubscribed 10-20-fold, and yet when it came to attracting anybody into the independent sector, we were only really attracting a handful. So absolutely, it's a communication issue that we need to get across, that this is a vibrant sector, technologically driven, and get across from the traditional mechanic terminology to one of technicians, which is effectively how what vehicles are like these days. They are computers on wheels.
Thank you for that, Wendy. I think there's a lot there for us to discuss, a lot there for us to follow up on, and we have got a number of questions that are coming in, but I'm just going to move on to our final or penultimate topic of the day, if that's okay, conscious of time, and it's Brexit. Now, first of all, we have set a world record because 400 people have collectively rolled their eyes, but we must talk about Brexit. And Wendy, if I can come to you first on the subject of Brexit, how does it affect our work, the UK's work, or the IAAF's work in Europe with regards to block exemption and lobbying and type approval?
Well, thanks for the easy one, Mark. Appreciate that. In a sense, nothing has changed. I mean, with regards to block exemption, that comes to an end, as you say, in 2023. The UK will adopt and comply with that legislation until then, so it's business as usual. We've already started working on the renewal. But interestingly, at this stage, it's primarily working with our colleagues in Europe, and there's a big public consultation which is due in next month, and we're encouraging all our members and as many of the community as possible to actually respond to that, because in terms of the UK government, they are still looking and listening at what is going on in Europe. And that was really that was very apparent in the new type approval legislation that came in September of this year in the EU, and this is the first example in our sector of the UK government going out on consultation to an approved bit of EU legislation. So they had the consultation. We submitted our comments. They were listened to, so all of that legislation has been adopted in full, so pretty much in line with what's going on in the EU. So I think at the moment, for the next few years, we are seeing a close alignment with the EU legislation and what's going on in the UK. However, that could all change in an instant. The UK government could all of a sudden decide, that's it, we're not doing that anymore, we're going our own way, and that of course is the big unknown, as is we're leaving the EU in less than 4 weeks, and we still don't know how that's going to impact our sector. Tariffs are likely to come into play, but it's not as if there's going to be a set 4.5% tariff across all parts. They differ by type of component. So it really is creating a huge amount of uncertainty for our whole sector. We simply don't know what's going to happen, and we're less than a month away from the end of the transition period. So I think the biggest challenge that we're going to be facing is keeping those supply chains open. I mean, we've already had examples of ports being in chaos and inundated with products coming through, and we haven't even left the EU yet. So great, if we have some form of deal that means it keeps the ports open for the time being, fantastic news. Otherwise, I think we are going to be facing some severe challenges in terms of availability, and that's not just on the finished component, of course. It could be on raw materials.
So much still up in the air. And Quentin, we spoke last week. There are reports of vehicle manufacturers flying parts into their factories. Can we, as an industry, expect disruption, whatever the outcome?
Yeah, I think this part precaution, if we can say that, of bringing parts before the D-Day is a great example from Wendy regarding the ports. We can see exactly the same thing. We were seeing the same thing back in March 2019, where potentially a vote would have led to a different outcome. And I think a lot of people are just don't completely know, and by people I mean businesses, are not sure what to do really. So some of them are betting on massively stocking. Some of them have stock from already quite a long period of time, but stock is expensive, and not all company can actually hold a huge size of stock. So it's a very difficult situation, and I think unfortunately a lot of given the situation and given the fact that we still don't have an outcome on the 8th of December today, a lot of players will have to play it by ear, and nobody can really say what's going to happen. That will have a huge impact on raw material import as well, on the currency rate, on the exchange rate for the coming for the few weeks, at least the few first week of 2021. So yeah, the uncertainty is huge, the unknown is huge. But I think for me, one of the key other point that we need to keep in mind is how this situation is going to impact new car sales. Why am I saying this? Because since Brexit vote, really, we've seen the new car sales declining. Okay, the record was in 2016 with almost 2.7 million cars registered in the UK, which was through the roof really in terms of numbers. And since then, it has been declining. And obviously, this year it's not going to be a good year because of COVID-19. Next year could be a fresh ball of air for the industry. But is it going to be the case if Brexit comes in the way? Probably not. So I think this is important to have this in mind, because the cars that are being sold now and tomorrow are actually planning automatically the aftermarket business that you're going to have in the next 3 or 5 years, depending on what type of player you are. So I think monitoring carefully those new registration and the type of car that are being sold, electric vehicles or not, is really key for players to actually plan ahead what their strategy is going to be for a longer term.
Okay, thank you for that, Quentin. It sounds like you're going to be very busy over the next 12 months, monitoring various different things. If I can move on to our final topic, and it's something that you started off with, or started discussing actually, Frank, which is service value and business models. And one of the things that the report found was that 70% of businesses believe they will need to change their business model over the next 12 months. We hear of reports where motorists have put off essential servicing and they're paying less attention to their vehicles. So, Frank, you mentioned about perceptions. How do we change the perceptions at the consumer level towards the garage?
I think that's a $64 million question. I think if we could answer that in one go, I think it would be amazing. I think very much we're seeing the change now. It's an evolution, and you know, from information we have through our Trust My Garage, which is the community consumer-facing side of sort of IGA, if you will. You know, the satisfaction levels from a customer's point of view for the independent sector are very, very high, and repeat business is very, very high. So I think, you know, customers are aware, consumers, car users are aware of the value that the independent sector offers them. I think, you know, in terms of changing that perception, it's an ongoing process. I think it needs to be everybody, and, you know, all the panelists are all involved in that anyway. We've all got a passion. I think that's quite clear, that, you know, the sector is driven by passion. The businesses that are there are very much owner operator businesses, by and large, and I think, you know, customer care is one of the best things that they offer. And when you look at the feedback that we get through members, that consumers actually really value their local independent, because of the service levels, that personal service that they get through that sort of sector.
Steve, do you think there will be more specialists emerge with some possible technicians or garages, or the market sort of moving away from that sort of broad brush approach and the emergence of more specialists in more vehicle marques or electric vehicles?
I do, actually. I do. I mean, I think that's the trend that's sort of been happening anyway. I think the days, the days when you could be a specialist in a whole raft of brands are sort of numbered, because the unfortunate thing is, even when technology is ostensibly the same, it's not. You know, I mean, take it's an off the top of the head example. You know, when Audi introduced their first aluminium car, you know, there was a huge amount of money required to gear up to repair that. Then Jaguar brought in an aluminium car, and guess what? You know, none of that technology could be shared across them. They've used the same stuff, but they've done it a different way. And I think that focusing in on one or two brands, you know, I mean, Andy Sava, who we all know and love, and Andy would tell you that's why he did it. He focused in on just a couple of German brands that he could be really good at, rather than trying to do a lot of things that he might not be so good at. And I think just cost and technology will drive that. I don't think that's a problem. I think actually that may be a better business model for a lot of people, actually. You know, just focus in on where you see the opportunity. You can find out what the most common cars are in your service park, you know, and focus in on those brands. But I just think that it will be the sheer cost of having all the kit you need to do everything is probably already prohibitive, but certainly will be going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. And it does lead me on actually to my final question before we get into the questions from the audience. And if I can start with you, Wendy, what is your one piece of advice or recommendation for businesses in our sector as we enter 2021, following a truly remarkable year of 2020?
I would say investment in people, training, the business, and embrace the new technology. Don't shy away from it. You know, and also don't you know, I think the ways that motorists are coming to workshops and garages is changing. Everybody uses the internet so much more, so embrace that rather than walk away from it.
Thank you. And Frank, your one piece of advice going into next year?
Yeah, I think, you know, echo what Wendy said. I think it's be open-minded. I think we're all going to face challenges none of us saw this year coming, and I think, you know, the independent sector has certainly risen to the challenge with it. I think we'll continue to do that, but I think it's be open-minded, and that will sort of get garages through the bulk of what's coming towards them, because none of us have a crystal ball, and flexibility is key, I think, over the coming 12 to 18 months.
And Quentin, that's the difficult part, isn't it? We don't have a crystal ball. As we've discussed this morning, there is so much that can affect business at the moment. What's your one piece of advice for businesses?
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo what Wendy and Frank just said. I think the key thing really is that a 3 or a 5 year strategic plan is not only for big companies, it can be for anyone. And time complicated time where some people are furloughed and have less activity at the moment is somehow an opportunity to actually think about that. Where do I want to be in the future? Find information that backs up the way they want to bring their strategy. I think it is really key, and it's not doing it once and not doing it for the next 10 years. It's really reassessing on a regular basis that strategic plan in order to be flexible, as Frank just mentioned, because we are not until we will certainly have more surprises in the coming years. And maybe one more thing that I would say, maybe more for independent garages, is we see, thanks, I'm saying thanks, it could be because of as well, but thanks to the situation, we've seen a lot of garages getting to up their game, if we can say that, and bringing more value to the clients, offering pickup services, offering delivery services of the car, and that kind of thing. I think this is very important to be always very customer centric. You need to offer the best experience to your customer, and if you believe that that service that you're adding to your portfolio is not good enough, is not done well enough, then just don't offer it. It's too risky to compromise yourself with a 20 years plus experienced client, where you also service their son, their daughter's car, by messing up something that you are not completely sure. So do it 120% and make sure to be 100% customer value orientated.
And Steve, that's a really good point, isn't it? Because if the pandemic's done anything, it's prompted change within a number of businesses. So, and to embrace new technology, new models of working. Bearing that in mind, and with what the other panelists have said, what would be your recommendation for 2021?
Well, agreeing with all that's gone before, I think, first of all, I mean, the new technology thing, I mean, this is quite profound what's happening at the moment, because we're not just talking about electronics, we're talking about the highly connected car, we're talking about autonomy in the form of ADAS at the moment, but that will move forward. And so it's a lot to take on. But look, I've been in the industry long enough that I remember people going, I'm not going to get involved with fuel injection, it's too complicated. Where would you be today? I mean, most of today's young technicians have never seen a carburetor. So, I mean, things do move on. And whether you think you will or not, you're going to have to deal with this new technology. So get engaged, get your people trained on it, and prepare yourself. The other thing is, as I mean, I ideally love this. I mean, 40 years I've been in this business. So, I mean, I ideally love it, but it frustrates the hell out of me. I mean, I live for the day when somebody says, you know what, we got too many technicians. Because, I mean, I've never known anybody ever say anything other than there aren't enough of them. But the other thing, and I apologize to those who may be the exceptions, but the sector is absolutely rubbish at marketing. You walk into the biggest, most plush dealership and you say, are you busy? Yeah, we're really busy at the moment. Why do you think that is? Don't really know. Oh, we're not very busy. Why do you think that is? I don't really know. And they say that because they don't have a hand in it. They're either busy because a lot of people come in, or they're not busy because a lot of people don't come in. And you've got to take control of your own destiny. We've talked about some of the things that are going to affect the business next year, particularly the lull in MOTs. Don't sit and wait for that to happen. Be out there. And, it might be glib to talk about things like seasonal campaigns, but they do work on some level, and they're better than doing nothing, so don't sit back and wait for the tide to hit you. Go out and do something, and have a hand in your own destiny. So there you go.
Thank you. I'm going to finish that off now, actually, and then move on to questions. I was going to come to you, Steve, but after I'm going to give you a little break for a moment. So one of the questions.
All right, I've cooled down now.
One of the actually, I'll come to you, Frank, to begin with. That's okay. A question from the audience: to prevent pricing or prevent probably a race to the bottom on price and all that goes along with that, would the panel support a fixed mandatory price for an MOT?
This is a perennial question. I mean, we sort of look at that, and I think there's a maximum price for an MOT, and it's based at that for a reason. There's all sorts of schools of thought in terms of minimum, fixed price, whatever. It's a commercial market, and it will always be driven by commercial forces. I've had lots of conversations with members, as you can imagine, around this topic. And I think if you're surrounded by lots of MOT centres who are discounting their MOTs, and it's part of your lifeblood, then you have to compete in that marketplace. And I think, you know, we've got to bear in mind that there's rules and regulations around cartels and things like that. So I think, you know, there's a maximum fee set, and, you know, whether the DVSA plan on reviewing that or not in the near future, I don't know. But I think it's a really, really difficult question. And the only real answer I can give is it's a commercial decision as to whether people discount or not.
Thank you for that. Anyone else would like to venture an answer to that difficult question?
Just to say, Mark, that the government that we have are totally against regulation if they can get away with it. So really, irrespective of what we think, and with the growth in MOTs over the last few years, it just ain't going to happen. So you know, I think the DVSA may decide to up the minimum, but up the maximum, but I just can't see it happening at all.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Frank, for those answers. Quentin, question for yourself. Do you think the value of second-hand vehicles will inflate towards the end of the 2020s, making repairs not previously viable suddenly fiscally sound?
Excellent question. I think the used car market is very interesting in the UK because this is the biggest one in absolute volume compared to any other EU5 countries. And in EU5 zone, you include Germany. Okay, we sell more. To give you an idea in terms of order, passenger car park in the UK is about almost 33 million that are on the road in use. Okay, in Germany it's about 47 million. Also, maybe it's 46, maybe it's 48, but you can see the kind of difference, the ratio. Okay, in absolute number, we sell in the UK it's a bit less this year, but about 8 million of used cars in the UK, and it's less than that in Germany. I think it's 7 million or something like this. Okay, so even if the car park is much bigger in Germany, we still sell more used cars in the UK, and this is down to the fact that vehicles. A lot of the vehicles that are sold new are often being financed somehow. Okay, could be a PCP, PCH, or any kind of finance plan. And therefore, when that plan comes to an end, that vehicle is potentially being sold on the used market, on the used car market. Okay, and this is really for dealers, for franchise dealers. This is at that point that the loyalty, the retention of the customer, because the car changed hands. This is at that moment that the retention cycle stops because someone else buy that car, and that someone else is more likely to be an independent garage client. Okay, so the used car market in the UK defines a lot the strength or the dynamic of the aftermarket, and this is why I react like this to the question, because it's really a very key topic. At the moment, used car market are mainly grasped in terms of aftermarket by independent garages. However, if dealers seeing less car sold new, if they see an opportunity to extend their services to used car market, it's going to be even more competitive. Now, as for the value of the car, it's a difficult question. Again, we can talk about crystal ball, but I think something which is interesting is that we will see a decrease in terms of used cars a bit this year, okay? But also we are seeing definitely a decrease in terms of new car sales in 2020. And this means that in 2-3 years time, when that first cycle comes to an end, there will be a shortage of relatively young used vehicle, especially if next year with Brexit, we still have a lower registration that we had in the last 3 or 5 years. So again, that would potentially means that the value would go up. Okay, that lack of stock in the next 2 and 3 years time. So my answer is yes, and the used car market is a really important market to have in mind in terms of aftermarket, And I'll stop here because otherwise I'm going to talk for another.
Thank you, Quentin. No, excellent answer. And that is pretty much it for questions. But Steve, I do have one more question, which I wanted to ask you, and it's addressed to yourself on the skills issue. Do you think part of the problem is the obsession of sending school leavers to university and not technical colleges?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, you know, Tony Blair's government 20-something years ago set this target of getting 50% of youngsters to go to university, because at the time it felt like we were slipping behind the so-called tiger economies in the Far East. I don't think, I mean, it took us, it was about 3 years ago we finally achieved that. And I don't think it had really been thought through. I think what we ended up with is a situation where 25% of all graduates end up in non-graduate jobs, because there simply isn't a demand for that many graduates, particularly, you know, when they've got degrees in media studies or something like that. And I don't mean any disrespect. I'm not trying to be glib, but I mean, a lot of people were going to university to take things that were not going to get them jobs. You know what I mean? And so I think this government, or at least from the coalition forward, they've been trying to change that. And if you think how long it took us to get 50% of kids to go to university, you can see how long it might take us to turn the ship around on this. But I mean, obviously, with the introduction of T levels, which are sort of technical A levels, if you like, the introduction of the new apprenticeships, which, you know, we have now, the apprenticeship standards, there's a real desire to try and get a kind of balance between those people who take practically based education and those that go into higher education down that route. So it has been a problem. Yeah, it has been a problem, and I think there's an awful lot of youngsters who've gone to university and incurred debt who would have been better off going through an apprenticeship or something similar. So yes is the answer to that. Is you know, and we're sort of on the curve trying to make that change.
Okay, thank you, Steve, for that answer. And sorry if we haven't asked your question. We will address those on our social media and also via our website, autoresource.co.uk. Sadly, that concludes the questions because we've run out of time, and concludes the webinar for 2020. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Special thanks to our speakers for giving up their time to share their views and their experiences. The State of the Aftermarket Report will be released on www.autoresource.co.uk very, very soon, and we'll also email all attendees with details on how they can access it. Today's webinar will also be hosted on Auto Resource website, and if you found it useful, please let your colleagues know about it, as we will be recommencing these in early 2021. Messe Frankfurt would like to wish everybody a very safe, happy Christmas and a new year, and on behalf of the whole team here, a big thank you for tuning in today, and in what has been a truly remarkable year for our industry, and I look forward to seeing you all and speaking to you all in 2021. Thank you very much.